Book of Luke. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to Jesus, "Look, half of my possessions I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of God came to seek out and save the lost." The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
I'm so glad to be in this circle today. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I've been looking forward to it, and it's a great joy. As a boy, I learned that Zacchaeus was short and that he climbed trees. I learned these things from a song. Zacchaeus was a wee little man.
And a wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree, for the Lord he wanted to see.
For the Lord. No, that's enough. Since I was short and I liked climbing the apple trees in my grandparents' yard, I figured that I would like Zacchaeus if I ever got the chance to meet him. But when I got older, I learned that most people didn't like him very much. Because he was rich, and especially because he'd gotten rich as a tax collector. As all of you know, Israel was occupied and oppressed territory. The Roman Empire was in charge. And tax collectors like Zacchaeus betrayed their own people by collaborating with Rome. They took money from their own people, from their brothers and sisters with God in the covenant, pocketed some for themselves, and then passed the rest on to their overlords. Tax collectors like Zacchaeus were reverse Robin Hoods. They robbed from the poor for the sake of the rich, including themselves. But Zacchaeus wasn't just a tax collector, he was a chief tax collector, which means he climbed higher in the system than he had climbed in the sycamore tree that day. Like anyone else who climbs the ladder in the system, that made him more responsible than lower level workers for the damage that system did to the poor and the vulnerable. But because he lived in the system for so long, and because he depended upon it for his lifestyle, he no longer saw or heard or felt the impact of his greed on other people. Another way to say it, I guess, is that he had labored so long in Rome's house that he no longer knew where his true home was. He couldn't remember who he most deeply and truly was, a child of Abraham and Sarah, a child of God. But for good reasons, the people of Israel despised tax collectors like Zacchaeus, and Jesus, on the other hand, made reaching out to them a high priority. Jesus loved the tax collectors, just as he loved everyone who felt far from God. The riffraff, the marginalized, the ashamed, the guilty. He opened his arms and he opened his heart to the tax collectors, to these questionable characters. He included them in the community of his followers. He loved them. And think of it, how difficult that must have been to love one like Zacchaeus, a high-ranking official, a rich man whom everyone else despised. someone who was rich and despised and highly placed. It's hard to like those people, isn't it? His welcome of such traitors annoyed many religious leaders, and Jesus dealt constantly with this kind of thing, with the carping criticism of people who were so good they could hardly stand it, and so good that no one else could stand it either. Zacchaeus, though, had heard that Jesus welcomed people like him. And he'd also heard that Jesus was on his way through town, on his way to Jerusalem, and Zacchaeus was determined to see Jesus. You've been there, haven't you, when the only thing you thought that might save you is if you actually got to see Jesus? A lot of other people wanted to see him too. Almost all of them were taller than this wee little man. So he ran ahead of Jesus, something men didn't do. He ran in public ahead of Jesus, and he did something else men in that culture didn't do without embarrassment. He climbed a tree, a sycamore tree, for the Lord he wanted to see. For the Lord he wanted to see. And Jesus said, Zacchaeus, you come down, for I'm going to your house today. Yes, I'm going to your house today. Actually, Jesus said, hurry. Hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So Zacchaeus hurried, Luke says, and was happy. He was happy to welcome Jesus. That little phrase, he was happy to welcome him, is the only summary we have of a story about which I wish we knew more. Jesus, I imagine, went to Zacchaeus' house, left his sandals at the door, washed his feet, or maybe Zacchaeus washed his feet. We don't know. Jesus prayed the blessing, then broke bread, drank wine, and talked with Zacchaeus. And he talked with Zacchaeus in a way that must have reminded Zacchaeus of what he'd long ago forgotten, which is of who he truly was. Not a quisling for Rome, but a child of Abraham and Sarah, a child of God. I imagine that they laughed and cried, laughed until they cried, and cried until they laughed, because Jesus said often that joy is always the right response when a lost one makes it home. Or when real home comes into the house of a lost one. When Jesus came to Zacchaeus' house, Luke says, salvation came. Acceptance crossed the threshold. Wholeness moved in. Justice rearranged the living room. Compassion took a place at the table. Forgiveness told stories that Zacchaeus hadn't heard since Sabbath school. I imagine that Jesus also looked Zacchaeus straight in the eyes and said truthfully but tenderly, your job's hurting you, Zacchaeus. Your job's hurting you in ways you can't see. And your job's hurting the poor that you chose long ago to ignore. He described to him how he was living on the sweat and the tears of other people. And he told Zacchaeus that some things were about to change. I think he told him that some things were about to change, not so much that things had to change. Oh, the changes were essential, but I think the point here is even more than the changes being essential, they're now possible. Because salvation has already come to the house. And with salvation at home in us, it has a way of generating signs of its own presence. Acceptance is what energizes transformation. Forgiveness fuels gratitude. Mercy makes repentance finally possible. I think the order matters. Jesus went to Zacchaeus' house and made it a home before Zacchaeus did anything other than hurry and welcome him.
Well,
Grace always comes first. And then our grateful response to it. We're on the threshold of All Saints. We're a day from Reformation Day. And I've been thinking about this priority of grace. Grace means salvation comes to our houses, to our lives, when they are in desperate need of rehab. Grace is the word for God's breathtaking generosity. For those things God does for us that we cannot do for ourselves, God gives us the priceless gift of life itself. We didn't have to be. We didn't will ourselves into existence. We can't sustain ourselves. We didn't manufacture the earth on which we stand, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat. We didn't give ourselves the minds with which we think or generate the talents and gifts with which we make a place for ourselves in the world. Life itself is grace. It's gift. We can either resist grace or receive it, but we can't produce it or deserve it or earn it. And that's why for so many of us, grace is hard to take. Hard to receive. Because we know too much about ourselves and not enough about God. Although we try to hide it from ourselves and from everyone else, we know that we've made a wreck out of things. There's that anger that seethes just beneath the surface and then erupts onto the people we love most. That bitterness which gnaws away at our happiness, the compulsions that chain us, the envy that turns friends into competitors, the regret over what we've done and failed to do, the people we've hurt, abused, neglected, overlooked, the shame over what we've become or failed to become. And then grace. Grace is another chance after we've blown all our chances. It's a new start at the end of the road. The embrace which welcomes us home after we've betrayed everything home stands for. It's dawn after the darkest night. Grace is Jesus, flesh and blood proof that God is with us, not remote from us, for us, not against us. The Sufi poet Hafiz said, just sit there right now. Don't do a thing. Just sit there right now. Don't do a thing. Just rest. For your separation from God, from love, is the hardest work in this world. Don't do a thing. Because there's nothing you have to do. As Beekner reminded us, nothing you have to do. Nothing you have to do. Nothing you have to do. Just rest. Rest from the separation from God and from love. Grace went to Zacchaeus' home and made it truly a home. And enabled him to remember he was a child of God. So when Zacchaeus and Jesus appeared on the front porch after supper, and after that long talk, and after all those tears and laughter, they appeared on the front porch, and Zacchaeus made an announcement to the people, to those people who were still clucking their tongues about Jesus being there to begin with. Look, half my possessions, Lord, I give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I'll pay back 4 times as much. It's a remarkable pledge. According to the law of Moses, it's 4 times more restitution than Zacchaeus was required to give. And his pledge is remarkable because he promised half his wealth to the poor people around him. I know you know, but we wealthy people have a hard time being generous. According to Ken Stern writing in a recent issue of The Atlantic, the wealthiest Americans, those earning in the top 20%, contribute on average 1.3% of their income to charity. By comparison, Americans at the bottom of the income pyramid give 3.2% of their income. But psychologists have conducted little experiments, and if you show the wealthy a video of a hungry child or a starving elder, it's not long before their willingness to be generous rises to match the level of other people. And I think, how sad that the only contact they have with people in need is through a video. But when we see people as neighbors, as children of God with hopes and dreams, that's when our own hearts begin to open. It's when Jesus saw Zacchaeus as a child of God with his own hopes and dreams that Zacchaeus' heart began to open. Nora Gallagher wrote of the change that came over her as a result of working in a soup kitchen and getting to know the people she served. She said, I remember thinking as I worked in the soup kitchen that I didn't want to know what I was learning. Because then my life couldn't go on in the same way as it had been before, driving around in my nice red Volvo, thinking about what new linens to buy. But what we learned, we can't unlearn. So, at the table with Jesus, Zacchaeus had his eyes, his ears, his heart opened, and signs of salvation flowed from him. And when Jesus comes to us, our lives will be different because at last they can be. Not all at once, but slowly, steadily, our lives become less about us, more about God and other people. And so Jesus will just show up in how we talk, how we listen, how we earn and spend our money, what we do with our time. There's no workbook or formula. All I know is that in one way or another, if we remain vulnerable to him, signs of radical love will appear. So here's what we get to do. Welcome Jesus into this day, into this moment. Sit at the table with him. Listen to him. Talk with him. Remember who we are. And then get up from the table with him and walk out into the world to become who he is and who we truly are and do what he does. Amen.
Amen.